Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
James thought fast. He suddenly doubled over and said, "Oh, Vanessa, my stomach is acting up. You need to go to the bathroom." James realized that the odor of perfume on his body had come from Amy and Sherry. It had been just a little massage from the secretary, and it had occurred hours ago. He never imagined that Vanessa's sense of smell could be so sensitive. She had the nose of a bloodhound. The massage hadn't even been his idea, but James knew he would never be able to explain the situation satisfactorily. He made a beeline for the bathroom and locked the door. Only then did he feel a little more at ease. "James, come out. How dare you look around for another woman behind my back?" Vanessa's angry voice came from the living room. Then he heard the muffled sound of a few women gathered outside the door, muttering to each other. "Come out, damn you! Come out!" Vanessa furiously pounded the bathroom door with her fist. It startled James badly, and his heart raced wildly. He definitely wouldn't open the door now. Vanessa and the others would eat him alive. There was no way to explain things clearly, so he'd stay in here as long as he needed to. "Let's see what you guys can do to me from out there," James thought from the relative safety of the commode. Realizing their entreaties were futile, the women gathered outside and quieted down again. Krista said gently, "Why don't you just come out and give us your side of the story? I know you're not that kind of person." Her words sounded reasonable and conciliatory, but James would not fall into her trap. Although he did not know much about women, he understood one thing. This kind of storm would not last for long. All would be well if he could just get past this squall. "Krista, I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I have to explain?" James stuck to his guns. "Damn it, James, you still want to deny it? I've always been very sensitive to the smell of perfume. I've even studied all kinds of fragrances. I can't possibly have made a mistake," Krista protested. Vanessa shouted, "Hurry up and come out. Tell us the truth. You are asking for a beating, jerk. Have you forgotten my temper?" James replied with a pained sob. "Vanessa, this isn't fair. Why don't you believe me?" Katie snorted derisively. A man's mouth is a faucet of lies." Cindy, who just arrived, wasn't used to this kind of drama, so she kept silent. James leaned against the sink and smirked to himself. Although the girls were aggressive, the locked door would protect him. He congratulated himself for his quick thinking. If he hadn't reacted so smoothly and taken refuge in the bathroom, he would really be in trouble. "I guess that the next time I want to ask Amy and Sherry for a massage, I'll need to be more careful," James thought to himself. He suddenly realized that there was no sound or movement from the women outside. This made him anxious. He heard the lock turning. Before he could react, the bathroom door burst open. Cindy stood in the doorframe holding a length of wire and smiling at James. Vanessa and Katie rushed in angrily and dragged James out by the ear, pummeling him with punches and kicks. James raised his head and looked at Cindy. "How did you get in here? What exactly did you do?" Cindy smiled and said, "James, I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you, I used to be a lock-picking expert, so an ordinary door." James was again stunned by the abilities of these talented and skilled women. They were truly formidable. "You?" James' voices shook with anger as he pointed at Cindy and cried, "I can't believe you would join forces with them to bully me. You betrayed me. I can't live like this." James managed some phony tears to make himself seem more pitiable. Cindy's heart softened. After all, they had just gone through a life-and-death crisis together the previous night. She began to walk over to James to comfort him. "Wait!" Vanessa pulled her back. "Cindy, don't be fooled. His skin is plenty thick. He fought off a bear single-handedly on that remote island. Our little tricks can't hurt him. He's just pretending to be pitiful. Ignore him." Cowed by Vanessa's fierceness, Cindy could only look at James and give him an apologetic smile. James saw that his gambit had failed and looked at Katie, realizing that the usually gentle, accommodating woman did not buy his account either. Then he looked at Krista. She simply shrugged. After the commotion died down, the four women filled the dining table with an array of mouth-watering dishes. In addition to all their other skills, they were the best chefs James had ever seen. "Sir, James, Mr. Tucker, James." Four beautiful women clad in identical kitchen uniforms approached solicitously. "Please, come to the table and have a meal." They were even more enticing than the delicious food on the table. Taking in the scene, James thought that at this precise moment, he might be the luckiest man in the world. James had intended to ignore them and pretend to sulk angrily, but in the end, he couldn't resist the tempting aroma from the table full of delicious food. And he definitely couldn't resist the temptation of the four beautiful women who seemed to have completely recovered from their earlier fury, now as calm and pleasant as a still pond on a summer's day. So they sat at the table, comfortably crowded together. Women were like this, ever-changing. The violent storm had passed and now it was sunny and clear. Why not? Why not enjoy happiness in whatever form it took? However closely it followed tears. Life is short. "James, taste this glazed pork chop that I specially made for you." "James, try my creamy mashed potatoes." "James, have a taste of this fresh bread I made." "James, I made you a hearty soup." Their enthusiasm melted James's heart. Once they were at the table, they all fussed over him and kept serving him sumptuous dishes. Any one of them would be a dream wife. Under the ardent gaze of the beautiful cooks, James carefully tasted the dishes one by one. Flavors were truly amazing. It had been a long time since he had eaten home cooking. James was touched. As wonderful as the food was, the company was even better. Such beauty, generosity, and grace. The door suddenly opened, and a familiar figure walked in from outside. Edward, the house's owner, had returned. He had timed his arrival deliberately, assuming that by this point James would have already dealt with the conflicts between himself and the women. Edward had come back to see what James was going to do next. As he entered, he saw four beautiful chefs surrounding James, attentively feeding him delicious-looking food. It was an image of paradise. Edward had wondered what kind of suffering the women would inflict upon James. This didn't look much like suffering at all. Edward was flummoxed. How did this guy do it? Did he practice some kind of black magic? Sorry. You guys continue. Edward, feeling awkward, turned around to leave. Hey, don't leave, Edward. You came right on time. Come, sit. Have some of this amazing food with me. James acted magnanimously, but inside he seethed. This guy had abandoned him and run away. Now he was back to watch James make a fool of himself. No, I'll go to the bar, Edward replied. James quickly got up and went to the door to stop him. He grinned and said, Edward, didn't you just come from the bar? Why are you going back there again? As you can see, my lovely wives have made a lot of food. It will go to waste if I can't finish it. James pulled Edward back to the dining table to sit down. Resigned, Edward squeezed into a space at the table, watching as the beautiful women continued to fawn over James, feeding him as if he were a Roman emperor. Edward was so envious it was practically torture. He understood very well that James was messing with him, but he could only sit there and endure it. At that moment, in a luxurious high-end club in London, a man with a dignified, domineering air and a distinctive scar upon his face was sitting in a luxurious leather chair, leisurely drinking coffee and smoking a cigar. He was surrounded by many young men in suits. They were all clearly strong physical specimens. Anyone could see that they were martial artists. They wore guns on their waists. The former vice president of the Excalibur Company, Mr. Castle, sat opposite him. Mr. Castle, have you thought about what I said? The scarred man raised the cigar in his hand and took a light puff. He reached out and tapped the ashes of the cigar onto the palm of one of his underlings. Zorro, sir, I have thought it through. That regrettable young man is going too far. I am willing to help you gain control of the company. Castle nodded and promised the knife-scarred man. Zorro grinned and waved his hand. "Carson, bring back the documents we discussed." "Yes, sir." A muscular young man with sharp eyes stepped forward and led Zorro's entourage out of the club, accompanied by Castle. Castle's back was drenched in cold sweat. It was true that he hated the young man in question, but he feared Zorro even more. Zorro was the leader of the infamous organized crime syndicate in London called the Outfit. He was a guy who chewed up enemies without spitting out their bones. Working with him was a bit like teaming up with a rabid dog. He'd picked up Castle's scent after learning he'd been fired by the new boss at the Excalibur Company. Castle was valuable because he knew the company and was pliable. For his part, Castle really had never had any choice in the matter. He could help, or he could die. "Mr. Castle, please." Carson gestured toward a waiting car, startling Castle out of his melancholy reverie. Shuddering at how physically intimidating Carson and the others were, Castle could only nod his head and comply. He sat in back and led them all the way to the Excalibur Company. As Edward suffered in silence, James's phone rang. Edward heaved a sigh of relief. James picked up the phone and saw that it was the old butler, Franklin, calling. "Hello, Franklin. What's the matter? Is everything going smoothly at the company?" He ignored the startled expressions on the four women's faces. "Boss, it's bad. Castle just brought a group of people in here and grabbed up a bunch of highly sensitive and important documents. This could mean big trouble for the company." "This just happened?" James angrily leaped to his feet and seized a porcelain bowl from the table, crushing it in his hand. The broken pieces fell to the ground as everyone gathered, watched in shock. Edward found James's fit of temper terrifying. He was like an enraged lion. "Yes, just a few minutes ago," Franklin said miserably on the other end of the line. "Okay, don't do anything reckless. Wait for me there." James hung up the phone without waiting for Franklin's reply. The room was frozen in stunned silence. James saw that everyone was staring at him and realized he was making a scene. He quickly reassured the four women. "There's no big problem, nothing to worry about." However, these were all intelligent, perceptive people. None of them bought James's casual act. Krista frowned and asked, "What company is it? What kind of trouble are you in that made you so angry?" James laughed and said, "Krista, don't worry, I'm fine. You guys stay here and wait for me. I'm going to go take care of something and I'll be back soon." James turned to the master of the house, Edward. Before James could say anything, Edward stood up and said, "Mr. Tucker, let's go. I'll drive you." James waved his hand and said, "That's okay, you don't need to come with me. Just give me the car keys and keep these ladies company." Before Edward could protest, James had already gone. By the time James arrived at the office, Franklin was already standing at the entrance with all of the employees, waiting. Although it was time to get off work, none of the employees had left. The security personnel looked as if they'd been dropped in a blender. Some were holding their arms, some were covering their faces, and some were gingerly rubbing their stomachs. It was obvious that they'd been through an intense fight and that they'd been savagely bested. Even Marcus and Lucas were injured. Marcus looked like he might be seriously hurt. He was slumped in a chair in the hall, his pale face colored only by the trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. "Boss," Franklin looked lost in his thoughts. His eyes were filled with panic and sorrow. However, when he saw James, he started to focus. The other employees in the company felt the same way. When they saw James, they all heaved a collective sigh of relief. They had been traumatized by the robbery. The perpetrators had brandished real guns and were clearly the kind of men with experience using them. Lucas helped his badly injured brother Marcus to his feet. "Boss, my dereliction of duty just now is disgraceful. I was unable to secure the facility and protect the company's important information. I'm sorry. I will resign from my post tomorrow." His face was pained. His tall body was hunched, unable to straighten. His abdomen had evidently sustained a serious injury. "Enough. Don't say any more." James waved his hand to stop him talking. Franklin misunderstood the gesture, believing James was about to fire the security chief. "Boss, Marcus was very brave just now. The responsibility for this is not on him. They all had guns. They pointed guns at his forehead and kept punching him in the gut over and over again, but Marcus was not willing to move aside. I only pulled Marcus away because I worried that he might die. If you want to punish someone, punish me. The gathered employees fell silent. Everyone was curious to see whether the new boss was heartless or something approaching human. James laughed and said, "Franklin, I think you misunderstood me. I'm not going to punish him or you. You all did the right thing. I'm very pleased with your performance and your loyalty." Franklin, quick, arrange for Marcus to get to the hospital right away. I want all of the injured employees sent to the hospital. James faced the crowd and raised his voice. "Listen up. All of you are people with flesh and blood, people with feelings and families, not just machines to make money for my company. Money is a renewable resource. We can always find a way to make more. If we lose the company, we can always set up another company. But if we lose our lives, we lose everything forever. So as my employees, all of you must remember one thing. Life is more important than anything else. In the future, no matter what, please take your own safety as your priority. Understand?" James's words moved all of the gathered employees to tears. In this country where money was supreme, capitalists only cared about capital. They only sought to exploit the labor class. When had they ever cared about their physical and emotional lives? James's acknowledgement of their humanity and worth revealed that there was also a side of warmth and affection to this new boss, a balance to his iron-hided toughness. "I understand, boss." "Thanks, Mr. Tucker." "We get it, boss, thank you." All of the employees joined the chorus of approval. At this moment, even the way they looked at James changed. From the midst of the crisis, true loyalty had been born. "Okay," James nodded, unexpectedly heartened. Although the company had lost some documents, he had unexpectedly gained the esteem of his entire workforce. "All right, now it's time to get off work. Everyone go home and get some rest. Don't worry, as long as I am here, the Excalibur Company will not close its doors." However, as he finished speaking, not a single employee left the hall. A handsome young man stepped forward and said, "Boss, we appreciate your concern very much, but now that the company is in trouble, how can we just go home and relax? No, we have to stay here and get through this with you." James smiled at the speaker, Holt, who had been promoted that morning to replace Negar. This young man was really something. James had a very good impression of him. "Right, I want to stay and face the company's difficulties together with the boss." "That's right, I want to stay too." "Me too. And me. Count me in." With Holt taking the lead, all of the employees stepped forward and pledged their dedication, refusing to leave. The entire company was demonstrating unprecedented unity. The smile on James's face became even more brilliant. This was everything he dreamed of for the business. However, he had already made up his mind. The enemy used guns. There was no way he could compromise his employees' safety by involving them in this mess. Sensing James's unwillingness, Franklin said, "Boss, everyone is so hyped about overcoming this disaster. Why don't we just let them help?" James firmly shook his head and said, "I appreciate your steadfastness, but you can't help me with this matter. I only ask that you continue to do your jobs tomorrow." "But boss..." "It's settled, Franklin. Come with me." In the office, Franklin told James the whole story in detail. Castle used to be the vice president of the company, so he knew all about the confidential documents detailing Excalibur's business secrets. He had taken nearly all of them. The other party's goal was obvious. He wanted to take the company for himself. "Franklin, did Castle say anything to you when he left?" Franklin shook his head and replied, "No, he didn't say anything." Their opponent's way of doing things was completely unorthodox. James checked the entire building's surveillance records and did not find any clues. The enemy was neat and tidy, and he had the style of a killer. James concluded that the robbery was most likely the work of an underground criminal organization in London. The spacious office fell into silence as James entered deep thought, struggling to make sense of the situation. "Oh," Franklin suddenly said, "I remember some things now. Those guys were all around the age of 25 or 26, and it seemed that each of them had the same tattoo on their necks." James's eyes lit up. "Is that so? What kind of tattoo?" Franklin narrowed his eyes, then opened them again and said, "The tattoo looks like a rose. Yes, it looks like a blooming rose." James immediately picked up the pen and started drawing. "Is it like this?" "Yes," Franklin nodded and said, "but a little different here, the stem." He took the pen and modified the drawing. Then he handed it back to James and said, "That's right. The tattoo looked like this." James said, "All right, Franklin, thanks. There is nothing else for you to do here. You should go home. Get some rest." "Boss, no arguments. You've been through enough today." After Franklin left, James looked out at the night view of London from his office window, illuminated by 1,000 twinkling lights. After a while, he grinned devilishly and said, "Since you like darkness so much, I'll show you what true darkness is." He lit a cigarette and took out his phone, punching in the number for Dax Freeman. As soon as the call connected, Dax's voice came from the other end.
Hello, boss. Do you have any instructions?
"Help me investigate something. A rose tattoo associated with an underground organization in London." James had always been very direct with him.
Okay, boss. I'll call you later.
A world-class top assassin, Dax didn't have any extra words to say. He was extremely efficient. James had just finished smoking a cigarette when his phone rang.
Boss, this tattoo is a special symbol of a very notorious underground organization in London. They call themselves the Outfit, and their boss is named Zorro. Zorro is a typical crime boss. He's ruthless and cruel. Word on the street is that his organization is now recognized as the top criminal syndicate in London.
James asked, "Can you tell me where the Zorro hangs out?" Dax said,
Sure, after I investigate a little further.
James replied, "All right, I'll wait for you." Dax paused for a moment, then said,
Boss, you seem to have run into some trouble. Do you need my help?
"I just need some information, but I appreciate your concern. You know I can take care of myself," James said with a laugh.
I know you are very capable, but this outfit is very dangerous. Do you really not need my help?
James replied, "There is really no need. You don't have to feel like you owe me anything, really. You've helped me a lot already. After I've settled this matter, I'll give you a generous commission."
No need. I did not do anything for you.
Dax wanted to say more, but James had already hung up. James picked up the key to a Bugatti Veyron and walked out of the office. The car had been left behind by the previous boss, and James considered it the company's property. James went to the garage and was dazzled by the luxurious sports car. He grinned as he slipped behind the wheel, fired the ignition, and burned serious rubber straight to the pier where he'd moored the yacht. He knew that his opposite number would be on guard tonight, so he wanted to retrieve a few AK-47s and some grenades that he kept on the boat. This ordnance had been left behind by the pirates, and he hadn't seen any of it since his time on the deserted island. The weapons had been sealed in the bowels of the yacht, but now it was time to let them out for some fresh air. Everything was right where he'd left it. James took out 2 AK-47s, bullets, and several grenades, stuffing them into a canvas bag he'd brought along just for this purpose. As soon as he returned to the car, he received a message from Dax. There were only 2 words in the message: Cloud Walk. James put away his phone and grinned. Darkness descends. He stepped on the accelerator and the Bugatti Veyron ate up the road like a ravenous shark.
Hoor je dat? Iemand is weer de held van de zaak. Die heeft de bedrijfsprocessen geautomatiseerd met Avas software. En daarmee werkt weer een organisatie leuker en succesvoller. Want als je alles in één softwareoplossing automatiseert, hou je tijd over voor echt belangrijke zaken. Dus maak je volgende slimme keuze op avas.nl. Succes begint met Avas.
James knew about Cloudwalk. It was a very famous high-end club located outside the suburbs of London, and its clientele was the cream of English society. James had come across a mention of the club as he searched online for some fun tourist attractions in London. His photographic memory had reliably stored the relevant information in his mind. He hadn't expected it to come in handy so soon. James drove the Bugatti Veyron straight to the Cloudwalk Club, savoring the driving machine's smooth and effortless speed. Guided by the GPS, James quickly left London and sped towards the outskirts. The wind whistled outside the window, a high and lonesome sound. The night beyond his windshield felt oppressive, a smothering darkness without a trace of starlight or moonglow. James felt that it was a suitable night to kill. The Cloudwalk Club was located in a valley, surrounded by lush rolling hills. There was only one way into the valley, making the club easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was close to 1 o'clock in the morning when James first laid eyes on the place, but the entire building was still brightly lit. From afar, it looked like a brilliant star had fallen to the ground. James's eyesight was very good. He noted the well-protected entrance. There were many thugs standing guard outside. Because he was facing a criminal organization, he would communicate with them in their own way. They understood violence, so he would use violence to express himself. The car roared like a maddened lion as it accelerated, filling the still night with the sound. The bright headlights of the car stabbed into the darkness like loosed arrows. As James intended, the dramatic display attracted the attentions of the sentries posted outside the club.
Hey, stop!
A few of the guards raised their guns and shouted at James.
Hey, stop!
At a club frequented by the rich and famous, it was not unusual to see a guest arrive in a ludicrously expensive sports car such as this. But the speed of this particular oncoming luxury vehicle was alarming. Moreover, cars entering the area went through a strict inspection process. Everyone knew the rules. Visitors would naturally slow down when they drew close to the entrance.
Not good. There's a problem.
The Bugatti Veyron did not slow down, but instead continued to increase its speed. Some of the security personnel began to pull out nail belts to throw onto the road, and others trained their guns on the Bugatti Veyron flying toward them. It was already too late. James's car was just too fast. It had reached an astonishing speed of 210 miles per hour, and it hit like a cannonball when it crashed through the entrance of the valley. Before the guards could throw the nails out or pull their triggers, the car had already hurtled past them, leaving behind only a deafening backfire and a thick cloud of exhaust. Undaunted, the toughs fired at the swiftly disappearing back of the Bugatti Veyron. Their bullets tore through the night sky, tracing lines of fire in the air, but the few rounds that hit their target did negligible damage. The car was simply moving too fast. James's actions were akin to shaking a beehive. The moment his car entered the valley, security forces reacted with alacrity. Hidden sentries lined both sides of the road. Alerted by the first set of guards, they fired on James as he flew past, subjecting him to a hailstorm of bullets. Many hit the windows and windshield. Although the glass was ostensibly bulletproof, it was quickly festooned with spider web-like cracks. James firmly grabbed the steering wheel and did not waver. By this time, countless nails had been thrown in the Bugatti's path. The situation looked dire. Relentless pounding gunfire came from behind, and tire-shredding nails waited ahead. This was a death run. The Bugatti's tires were bulletproof, so a puncture wasn't James's concern. The problem was, at such a fast speed, they could easily cause the car to flip sideways or swing its tail uncontrollably. And there was no such thing as an accident-proof car. James quickly observed his surroundings. On the left was a small river flowing through the valley, and on the right was a grassy slope of 50 or 60 degrees. Just as the car was about to roll over the first nail belt, he savagely yanked the steering wheel and drove the car up the slope on his right. He immediately plowed into a guard hidden there, sending him flying before the man knew what hit him. After passing the nail beds, James turned the steering wheel and allowed the car to return to the main road below. At that moment, inside the Cloud Walk Club, two men watched the action outside unfold on a large video screen. One of them was former Vice President Castle, and the other was Zorro, feared leader of the outfit. On the screen, a Bugatti Veyron rushed in from the entrance of the valley. "It's coming! It's coming!" Castle pointed at the screen and said. As the vice president of the Excalibur Company, he recognized the car from his previous boss's garage and instantly understood that it was James behind the wheel. Castle goggled at the car's ridiculous speed. Even Zorro wore a surprised expression. "This guy is totally nuts," Castle muttered. "I call it good timing. I've already set up an inescapable net here tonight," Zorro remarked coldly. He watched James using the slope beside the road to dodge the nail belt. He smiled appreciatively. Zorro stretched out his hand and the attendant beside him produced a cigar. Zorro lit it up and took a puff. After issuing a neat smoke ring, he grinned and said, "This person is interesting." After being briefed by Castle on James, Zorro closed the club to the regular distinguished guests from London for the night. The club was actually the headquarters of the outfit. Zorro was waiting for James, curious to see if he had the courage to kill his way through the door. For Zorro, killing a few people, playing a few games, and letting his minions get some exercise was a typical evening. He never would have dreamed that his actions could doom the entire outfit, because he didn't yet understand James Tucker. Whenever James encountered a nail belt, he would drive up the slope beside the road to avoid it. He drove with his left hand, displaying the skills of a world-class race driver. His right hand held an AK-47, which he fired out the passenger side window. He was momentarily distracted by the image of himself as the hero of a Hollywood action blockbuster, simultaneously stunt driving and firing a machine gun. But this was not the time for narcissistic fantasies. James focused his mind on dealing with the situation in front of him. The gangsters were worthy of their reputations as fearsome enforcers for the notorious outfit. They kept the heat on James, unfazed by his feats of automotive daring-do and ceaselessly chattering automatic rifle. A group of them ran toward the entrance of the parking lot situated at the end of the road, preparing to block James. Others began to throw grenades at James's car. Gunmen peppered the vehicle mercilessly with hot lead. The Bugatti Veyron was a marvel, but no car could withstand such a sustained assault. The windows and windshield were completely shattered. The entire body of the car was riddled with holes, and smoke poured out from under the crumpled hood. As James drove, he managed to dodge many of the bullets that came at him from all directions. Only his peak-level physical fitness and sharp senses allowed him to survive the onslaught. Anyone else would have been filled with more holes than a wedge of Swiss cheese. He had an encouraging thought. Though the lack of windows greatly increased the risk of him being shot, it also afforded him a more advantageous opportunity to attack. He once again used the slope beside the road to dodge a nail belt. He stabilized the steering wheel and braced the AK-47 against his right armrest, extending its muzzle through the space his window used to occupy. This AK-47 was the gun that he had used to kill a crew of pirates on a deserted island. He knew its quirks and nuances. It felt like a good friend that he had not seen for a long time. Flames licked from the barrel of the gun, drawing lines of fire in the night sky. With exquisite skill, James picked off attackers lining the side of the road without even needing to look at them. James's display of almost supernatural skill with the gun drove his attackers to retreat. He seemed to them to be an avenging demon out of hell. He had killed 20 men in less than 30 seconds. James took a moment to savor this brief reprieve, but it was ended almost immediately. He had nearly reached the entrance of the club's parking lot. His highly attuned senses immediately picked out a man, standing in the road a few hundred yards ahead of him, who radiated danger. The man was dark-skinned and difficult to see in the moonless night. until he smiled and revealed a mouthful of brilliant white teeth. James was more concerned with the rocket launcher that the man held on his shoulder, aimed directly at him.
Come and get it, dog meat. I prepared this especially for you.
The man grinned at James again and pulled the trigger. A bright gout of flame shot out of the weapon and lit up the scenery around him. A small rocket shell flew towards James's car at high speed. The missile left a long trail in the air like a shooting star streaking across the night sky. But James did not have the time to appreciate the special beauty of the moment. As his eyes locked onto the flying rocket, he made a series of precise calculations in his mind. He stepped on the accelerator. Instead of swerving, the vehicle surged forward. Just as the shell was about to drill through his engine block, James suddenly swung the car's tail around, causing the vehicle to drift sideways. James shoved his seat back as the rocket shot through the driver's side car window, unencumbered by glass, and out the passenger side window with a deafening roar, burying itself in the roadside slope. Flames soared into the sky. The shockwave blew sand and gravel everywhere, covering almost half of the parking lot. James swung his tail violently once again and stepped onto the gas. Before the man with the rocket launcher could react, the battered Bugatti Veyron smashed into him, flinging his shattered body into the brush. James's heart began beating rapidly. He felt like he was dancing on the tip of a blade. Being so close to death excited him greatly. The parking lot afforded no cover, so James again stepped on the accelerator and drove the car straight through the impressive doors and into the hall of the club. As the car approached the front desk, James simultaneously stepped on the brakes and kicked open the car door. He held on to the gun and rolled behind a thick pillar. As he leaned against the pillar, getting his bearings, a grenade finally managed to blow up the Bugatti. The huge explosion hurt James's eardrums, temporarily deafening him. Before the dust cloud could settle, countless bullets riddled the pillar. James dropped into a crouch and threw out 2 grenades of his own, and 2 large balls of fire lit up the hall. The powerful explosion shook the entire building. The grenades temporarily suppressed the opponent's attack. James took the opportunity to jump into a narrow passage behind him. As he landed, James pulled the trigger of his rifle and shot. A guard hiding in the tunnel was killed on the spot. James hadn't known that there was someone there. He had only fired as a precaution. Lucky, he thought to himself. James slid across the floor and reached the bottom of the tunnel. He carefully looked around and spotted a security staircase that led upstairs. There was no one else down here except for the thug he had taken down. James took a grenade and a gun from the guard's body and replenished his ammunition before climbing the stairs. His body felt tight, like a cat's. He bounded quickly up to the second floor. Another group of thugs waited for him there. James showed no mercy. The assault rifle in his hand kept firing and firing, killing them all. He stalked deeper into the club like a tiger hunting in the jungle. He moved with an almost eerie speed and grace, avoiding or destroying all of the surveillance cameras along the way. Very quickly, James reached the 4th floor. He heard a series of echoing footsteps. A group of people was running down the stairs. They were supposed to be guarding the 5th and final floor, but the gunfire from the first 3 floors was so intense that the boss had directed them to go down to help. James's hearing surpassed that of ordinary people. He could tell from the sound of footsteps that there were at least 5 or 6 gangsters in this group. The footsteps drew closer and closer. James hid at the corner of the staircase connecting the 3rd and 4th floors. Timing the moment perfectly, James jumped out and swung the AK-47's butt into the face of the gangster leading the charge. He fell straight down, his face smashed into a bloody mess. James's attack was extremely fast. He hooked his hands into claws and slashed at the necks of the 2 thugs at the back. 2 crisp sounds rang out as the guard's neck snapped. The pair of them instantly fell to the ground. The remaining two gangsters reacted in a panic, clumsily raising their guns at James. James leapt high into the air, ruthlessly kicking the two of them to the floor. He jumped up high again, coming down on the thugs with savage knee strikes. Then he rolled forward, taking a butterfly knife from his pocket. He threw it in a low, flat arc, piercing the throat of the last gangster struggling to rise. James had chosen not to shoot because he did not want to expose his position. Moving silently with the surveillance cameras out of commission, no one knew where he was. Using similar methods, James quickly cleaned up the other gangsters on the fourth floor and made his way to the fifth. In the spacious fifth-floor office, Castle heard the sounds of gunshots and explosions coming from below and began to tremble. He was just a businessman, and he had never experienced such a scene before. Zorro, by contrast, calmly smoked a cigar and smiled as he said to Castle, "Don't be so nervous. No matter how tough he is, he won't be able to get up here." At that moment, James kicked open the door to the fifth-floor conference room. There were 4 gangsters in the room. They were Zorro's bodyguards, highly skilled killers. However, before they could even pull out their guns, James had already used his superhuman gun sense to blindly fire into their midst. The 4 bodyguards, all possessed of extraordinary skills, fell before they even saw James's face. James closed the door of the conference room and pointed the smoking firearm at Zorro and Castle. He smiled and said, "Hello, Mr. Zorro." Zorro was stunned speechless. Castle looked at the blood all over the floor. His heart lurched in his chest and he almost fainted. His legs went weak and he fell to his knees with a thud. He begged James for mercy.
Boss, no. It wasn't my idea. I was forced. If I didn't do what they said, they would have killed me.
James walked over unhurriedly. He took the cigar from Zorro's raised hands, puffed on it, and grinned. "And you think I won't?" Castle sputtered incoherently. He was caught between 2 equally dangerous opponents. These were people who would send you to hell just because they didn't like the color of your shirt. In the past, he had always felt that he was high and mighty, a protected scion of the upper class of London. Now he felt as powerless and out of his element as a kitten thrown into the middle of a sumo match. As Castle fretted, Zorro unexpectedly laughed.
Good. Very good.
Facing James's black gun muzzle, he showed no fear. Instead, he looked amused. A vicious gang leader like him dealt with violent death on a daily basis. It was not strange for such a man to keep his cool in the face of an attack. Even so, his completely relaxed state made James suspect that Zorro must have some kind of trump card up his sleeve. James didn't care. He just wanted to slap the smug jerk, and that's what he did. James was much stronger than an ordinary man. His slap knocked Zorro to the ground. "I haven't told you to speak." Amazingly, not only was Zorro not angry, he laughed again and said, "Mr. Tucker, take it easy. I'm not going anywhere. Take a look at this first." Zorro pressed a button on a remote control. 3 images appeared on the huge screen in the office. James's body froze. The images were photos of Vanessa, Katie, and Krista. James saw red. He roughly pulled Zorro up from the ground and shouted, "You dare?" Those 3 women were his life, and they were also his fatal weakness. If anyone dared to touch them, he would unhesitantly kill them and their entire families. Zorro didn't retreat. He knew he'd gain the upper hand. He said, "Mr. Tucker, don't worry. As long as you cooperate with me, my people won't touch a single hair upon their lovely heads. But if you don't cooperate, I won't prevent my subordinates from doing something that will make these ladies' loved ones very sad indeed." James forced himself to calm down. He let go of Zorro and said calmly, "Are you threatening me?" He had figured Zorro must have some kind of trump card, but he never thought he'd go this far. Zorro sat down on the sofa, spread his hands, and shrugged. "Mr. Tucker, this is not a threat. I am speaking with utmost sincerity to negotiate with you, okay? He arrogantly took back the cigar from James and started to smoke. Even though James had a gun in his hand, Zorro didn't betray the slightest fear. A gangster like him understood that the key to controlling a person was to find his weakness, and these three women, they were James's weakness. James stared daggers at Zorro, allowing the silence to gather intensity. He was testing the gangster. Zorro remained sitting with a relaxed expression. He regarded the younger man with bland equanimity, seemingly unaware that nothing prevented James from blasting him full of holes right then and there. James inferred from Zorro's unconcerned air that the women might really be in trouble. Mr. Tucker, why not take a little breather from fighting and killing? To tell you the truth, I don't care much for either. Now put down the gun and sign this contract. We'll write off everything that happened tonight. Let's be reasonable here, huh? James did not respond. He slowly dropped the gun and reached for the pen. To him, nothing was more important than the well-being of the women Zorro had threatened. To ensure their safety, he would sign over $100 billion, control of the company, anything in his power to give. James's phone rang, breaking the heavy silence in the room. It was a jarring moment, putting everyone present on edge. James saw the call was from Dax. Despite the moment being completely inappropriate for a phone call, he answered.
Boss, did you run into any trouble over there?
James replied non-committally.
Well, you can rest assured the ladies are safe. I arranged for killer number 4, the Soul Reaper, to protect them.
Dax's voice was like a hoarse rasp, generally unpleasant to James's ear, but at this moment it sounded like the most beautiful music in the world. James ended the call, his eyes alight. Dax was his lucky charm. James resolved to thank him properly when all of this was over. Zorro was completely unaware of all of this. He continued to look at James with an expectant smile. Mr. Tucker, sign it. The quicker you sign, the sooner your girlfriends will be safe. The self-satisfaction in his tone was unmistakable. As far as Zorro was concerned, the Excalibur Company was already his. James grinned and replied, I'll sign your mother. Zorro was completely stunned, and his mask of relaxed affability fell away in an instant. You'll be sorry you said that, punk. James sneered and answered, Zorro, sir, you really don't understand me, and you're going to regret it.